Welcome back to the morning grind. Dean once again with you. You guys, we're going to be talking, I know happened earlier this week, but we're going to do it all over again. There was MMA in the middle of the week, kind of like muck things up as far as our schedule. We're recording a little bit later, but still want to give some MMA to the people, and we're going to bring back Artivore, SunTszu Joe. Joe, ready to talk some MMA? This is what, the third MMA event in, I guess, 8 days? Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, it'll be, actually 8 days, actually. Saturday, Wednesday, and then Saturday again. And, we were talking off air, Dean, and I was the proud, taker of second place.
Sounds great.
In the Millie Maker. I mean, do you believe it? In the Millie Maker. And if you ask why am I still gracing RotoGrinders with my presence after taking second place in such a high dollar value contest, it's because first place was 19 people. Second place, which is actually 20th, was 77 people. So where first place took home about 66,000 each, which is nice little payday. Second place, like myself, tied with 76 or so other people, took home $400, which, boys and girls, is what a top-heavy contest looks like. 66,000 is great. Those of us who had Max Holloway are really, because I would have taken down first. Would not have been 66,000, would have been more like 16, but that is better than a poke in the eye with a sharp stick. So that was an interesting card. I think betting got me a little even, and I'm happy to, with my one bullet in the bracket challenge or the knockout challenge, I actually advanced. With my crappy lineup, I actually finished like 25th. But, the scoring was so tight that if you scored 3 points worse, you would have been knocked out, because you had to finish in the top 50 to advance.
Yeah.
So now on Saturday, I go against the top 50, and the idea is to be in the top 25. So I was able to advance. And then last night was a really strange card. I was looking really, really good heading right into that Molly McCann fight, or as they call her, Meatball Molly. And we got Ms. Santos, who had a bit of an upset in that fight, really cost me, and could have been a really good night, but it wasn't.
Yeah, well, I was going to ask your impressions. We kind of speculated on a previous show, talking about like what do we expect out of Fight Island, talking about the judges, talking about, kind of like, we were talking about the, significant strikes. What's a significant strike? Who's counting them? And both those things I saw popping on Twitter. And of course, you were on the wrong side of it as far as Holloway as well. If that decision went your way, and I saw, I guess everything's subjective, and there's a lot of subjective things, and was it overwhelmingly people thought Holloway was the victor, and that just whatever reason the judges kind of goofed, or what?
Look, I don't know if I would call it an outright robbery. I mean, there was one round that was really close. I mean, I've seen worse decisions. I was actually nervous going into that decision, because I really, my heart said, yeah, let's give it to Holloway. I really did think he won 3 rounds to 2. But there was one round that was really close. And just to be clear, as it relates to significant strikes, and that has nothing to do with Abu Dhabi. It has nothing to do with the judges. I honestly believe that because of all my complaining, and if I was a conspiracy theorist, I would say someone at Fight Metrics or UFC Strikes Now, I believe they absorb Fight Metrics, just had an axe to grind against me. So like they
know your lineups.
Yeah, I mean, like they're it's so inconsistent. I mean, last night, Flash Gordon, who had a kind of a dominant performance in a win, got credited with something like 42 significant strikes when he actually landed more than that in the third round alone, right? In my opinion, and in others. I mean, a lot of people were outraged. So there needs to be some consistency, because this really costs money. And then going quickly back to Max, he got 2 knockdowns. I mean, it was, everybody pretty much said it. The UFC, the announcers, for whatever reason, whoever DraftKings was using, and apparently there's some discretion in what's considered a knockdown. Like, they don't always go off the stats provided by the UFC. I don't understand all the dynamics to it, but Max got credit for no knockdowns. So that was another 20 points that we were cost, because a knockdown is 10 points. So yeah, the inconsistent, it's something that has to be remedied with these prize pools getting a lot bigger. And when you were playing for 5,000 or 10,000, which, don't get me wrong, is not insignificant money, but in the grand scheme of things, I mean, Dean, when you guys are playing baseball or basketball or football, and you're shooting for much higher prize pools, right? You know, the focus on statistics and getting it right. And I don't know, how many times were you affected by, you know, scoring changes after the contest, right?
Oh yeah.
Like you don't ever see that in MMA. I mean, you know, it might take a while for the fight to get scored. Like there have been occasions where the next fight has already started and you're still waiting for round 3 of the prior fight to be scored. But they're not changing scoring. You know, it's just essentially they're updating it where, you know, I've seen it in NBA especially where, you know, you really don't want to post any victories because, you know, you're always subject to scoring changes and sometimes it works in your favor and sometimes it works against you. So with the advent of these really high prize pools now in MMA, something needs to be done. There needs to be some defined level of consistency because it's costing us money. It's frustrating people, especially high volume guys. It's really frustrating us because we just don't know from one fight to the next, you know, whether significant strikes is going to be a factor or not.
Yeah. Not a Billy Maker this week for what it's worth. It's $18 to jump in. You can turn 18K into 150K with a total prize pool of 600K if you happen to bink it and nobody else has the a duplicate lineup. Just for a second, as far as Holloway, I'm curious your thoughts on this because this is one of those things you hear, one of those unwritten rules. I'm fairly certain he was the challenger to a champion.
Yes.
It isn't the thought, like one of those traditional thought process you hear is like you have to beat the champion, not like just barely inch him out. And like if it's that close, they just yield to the champ. Is that something you think they may have implemented there? And is that
that's a boxing? Like I used to hear, like I used to be as many of us who, and some people still are. And in all honesty, I mean, I started as a boxing fan. I mean, I would go to Vegas. I'd go to all the fights. I mean, I love Bernard Hopkins, you know, Floyd Mayweather. I would go to all the big fights in Vegas. And some of the largest bets I made were on fights and, you know, just the whole fight night atmosphere. And I migrated to MMA to the point now where I hardly ever watch boxing at all. That was an old adage in boxing. Like, if you're a champ, you got to take it from them. If it's close, I don't see that as much in MMA. I mean, and in all honesty, it shouldn't really. I mean, because there are metrics. I mean, you're looking at strikes, you're looking at takedowns, you're looking at knockdowns. I mean, you know, yeah, there's some ambiguity, but I don't necessarily see that as much. I don't even honestly see it as much in boxing anymore. But you know, that's the one thing my dad always would tell me. He's like, yeah, you got to take it from the challenger. Yeah. Like you got to beat the champion. And I just don't think it's as much of an adage anymore as it used to be.
How much fun were those Bernard Hopkins intros is walking down to the ring?
I love it. You know, Bernard Hopkins, a quick story about Bernard Hopkins. I know this is an MMA pod, but Bernard Hopkins, when he fought Felix Trinidad, he was a 2-1 underdog. And Trinidad had all the hype, and Bernard Hopkins was not an exciting fighter. He was a counterpuncher. Like not a lot of people outside of boxing really knew who Bernard Hopkins was. And here's Felix Trinidad, this, you know, fighter from Puerto Rico. He's got a lot of flash. You know, he beats Oscar De La Hoya. You know, he comes in and he's a 2-1 favorite. So this offshore sports book or offshore Golden Palace gives Bernard Hopkins $100,000 to actually paint, like having, like this was common, actually not common, but this was not unheard of back in the day. He would actually put it on his body, like a temporary tattoo, like on his back that advertised Golden Palace. So he took the $100,000 and went into the sports book and betted on himself. Now
that's awesome. Over the top style.
Yeah, had I known that, I would have like actually been all over Bernard Hopkins in that fight because I love a guy that puts his own money on himself. And you're typically allowed to bet on yourself. It's true even in MMA. I mean, you can bet on yourself. You could actually bet on other fights. You just can't bet against yourself in a fight. But yeah, I love Bernard Hopkins. He was one of my favorites.
Does anybody ever come out in the MMA and say, like, I'm betting on myself? Does that happen commonly? Because
I thought, yes, I had heard, yeah, you do hear it. And I had heard Tony Rocco Martin, when he fought Damian Maia, he made a fairly large bet on himself. He lost, but he made a fairly large bet on himself when he fought Damian Maia.
All right, the slate that's going down this Saturday. Well, before we dig in, it's interesting because I feel like content providers and just everybody in general are probably getting a late start as far as analyzing this. And do you think that's going to affect? It's a small window, like
right.
You know, as far as researching, putting out content, and all that. Does that have any sort of effect as far as lineup construction? You think, or it's just a random thought I had? I
think it might. And here's what some guys did. Like there are some guys who look. I watch as much as I can. I'm not like other people who don't want to be influenced. Like I want to be able to process information. And I think one of the good things, or one of the things I've learned, and it's cost me money, but one of the things I learned is to filter out information that's not useful and filter in information that's useful. So for that reason, I'll watch a lot of different video pods and audio pods, and there are people I respect, who put out really good content. A lot of guys, I shouldn't say a lot, but a number of podcasters actually did both cards at the same time, like the Wednesday card and the Saturday card, and just like they recorded at the same time and they just waited to release the Saturday card. So now it's just a function of like having to do an update if any fights cancel. And again, there are no fighters obviously that are on both cards. So it was actually something that could be done. But just for ease, I've seen a lot of people do that. And there are some pods out, and I think there's still going to be a fair amount of content. It's just you're not going to have as much time to process it.
We are recording this on a Thursday night. Far as I can tell, far as I can see, nobody's been scratched, right? Everybody's still fighting that was originally supposed to fight.
Knock on wood. Knock on wood.
Yeah, hopefully that holds true. 12-fight card. What are your thoughts as far as the overall 12 fighters here? Well, I guess 24 fighters. The 12 fights. As far as, do you like this card? Do you not like this card?
I like this card. I like this card, Dean, because I see some value in this card. Like the title fight is actually a rematch, and it was actually a fairly recent rematch. And the reason why there's a rematch is because the victor in that fight severely headbutted Joe Benavidez. And that actually impaired him to the point where it made him relatively easy to finish. And everybody kind of saw that. He didn't really get penalized for it at all. And apparently even in Portuguese, the Figueiredo, and again, this could all be bluster. After the fight said he meant to headbutt him. And, that's all the UFC needed to hear. So they kind of rebooked this. I will say, Joe B at his underdog price, the line was a lot closer going into the first fight. And also Joe B, for those people who aren't hardcore, his wife is Megan Oliveri, the UFC like sideline reporter. So one, he already hit it out of the park by virtue of marrying her. And my point is they've been together in Abu Dhabi for a while. So like, having like that kind of routine available is going to help. And, having, Figueiredo, I don't know when he arrived, but he had to fly in from Brazil, which is kind of a fairly long flight. So I think that's an interesting fight. And I also see some fades, and I see some real value on this card.
Well, let's knock out the featured fight, like the 5-round fight first. I feel like that's the most important to talk about. How much do we need it? How ballsy is it to fade it? You talk about Joe B is currently plus 170. I'm seeing right now. I'm looking at the DK and the FanDuel Sportsbook, kind of combining them together, to be honest. Minus 190 for this fight to not go the distance. How much do we need this? Are we considering stacking this, or do we potentially fade it?
Yeah, I don't know if I would necessarily stack it. Look, Figueiredo has not scored 100 points in his last 4 fights. Now, he's gotten close, and he's actually hit 10x or better in his fights, so that's good. But, as he's progressively climbed up in terms of competition, his scoring has fallen off a little on DK. Look, 98 is nothing to sneeze about, and, 94, 90. But, again, he hasn't fought the same level of competition. Now, the one good competitor out of the last 4 that he fought, Jussier Formiga, who's kind of fallen off a cliff recently, beat him. And Figueiredo was a favorite going into that fight, and he obviously did not score well in a loss. So I don't know that I necessarily see a great floor for Figueiredo, and he is fairly expensive at $9K. Now, if we look at Joe Benavidez, he is So Joe Benavidez has been a much better scorer in wins of late. So he actually beat Formiga, who was the guy who beat Figueiredo several fights back. He scored 108 in that fight. He scored 102 the fight before, and scored 113 the fight before that. Now, in a loss against Figueiredo, he only scored 23 points. So I think the winner will do reasonably well in this fight. And obviously, if Joe B wins, he should be on the optimal because he's really cheap at 7.2K. I don't think he's ever scored in a win. Yeah, he actually scored, he has an earlier, like back to 2016, he had some low scores in wins because he's not a prolific striker. Usually you want to see him get some takedowns. I think Figueiredo is going to need to. Figueiredo's a more aggressive striker, and he obviously has the potential for a knockout, which I don't necessarily see Joe Benavidez getting. Also maybe some grappling. This could be a really good scrambling fight for DK. So I don't know if I would stack this fight. I see a lot of value elsewhere on the card. I don't think you need to stack it. I don't say that you necessarily need, this fight, but over 5 rounds with some grappling heavy points, you should probably have some exposure to it. Particularly if you like Joe B here, because again, at his price point, he doesn't have to do much to get 10x to get optimal. At 9K, Formiga's got to do. Figueiredo has got to do a little more.
All right, you've teased it. Well, who are the value plays here? What's the value that's popping for you right now?
Okay, so there's a bit of narrative here. So first of all, I want you to look at Ariana Lipski at 8.3K. Okay, so in her last 3 fights, she was a 5-2 favorite. She lost the first 2. The third fight, there was a short notice replacement who, because she was short notice, missed weight, ended up having to give 30% of her purse to Lipski. Much inferior, was by far the easiest competitor that the UFC put in front of her. And she won that fight. Okay, she was supposed to win and she won. She, again, was a 5-2 favorite. So 3 fights, 5-2 favorite, all 3 fights, win is 1-2. So what does the UFC do? They give her a 4-fight contract. Do you want to know why they gave her a 4-fight contract? And again, I know this is PG, so I'm going to keep it clean.
I have a guess.
She is one of the most attractive fighters in all of MMA. You could look at her Tapology page, Dean, which I'm sure you're going to right now, and just Google Ariana Lipski and see some of her images. This is the type of fighter that the UFC wants to give every chance to be successful. I mean, look how long they stuck with Paige Van Zandt. So this is a fighter, that actually, was in an okay promotion and did well. Her nickname is the Violence Queen in this contest, the Violence Queen, at 8.3K. She is fighting Carolina, whose nickname is Dread, who's coming off a really, really good DraftKings performance, where she put up 109 points, had 111 significant strikes, 1 knockdown, 2 reversals, and an advance, and scored 109 points. I believe, Dean, and I don't have the odds open, I believe this is pretty even from a betting perspective.
I have it in front of me. Lipski currently minus 137, minus 335 to go the distance for what it's worth.
Right. Yeah, it's gonna go the distance. Okay, so when I thought I saw minus 115, minus 15. That might have been on the open, but anyway, Carolina is 6-1. Okay, she got into the UFC by virtue of a unanimous decision win on the Dana White Contender Series. Her next fight was against what we call Priscilla Catch-a-Beating, based on the amount of significant strikes Priscilla took against Valentina Shevchenko in an open-ended mismatch. So Carolina beat her. She's 6-1. Okay, she lost her first professional fight and then won 6 fights in a row. As much as it pains me, because I want to see weigh-ins with Lipski, I think the value here, and it's pretty significant, is on Carolina. I mean, it's 7.9K. It would not surprise me if when we get closer to fight time that this line goes back to about even or minus 115. So it's 7.9K. I like her. I'm probably going to come as close to a full fade on Lipski as I possibly can. Again, if I'm maxing the $18 contest, I'll have some shares of her just because for game theory and I like to have exposure to all fighters. But I really do see a significant amount of value in Carolina here at 7.9K. You
like her plus 110 as well to win?
Again, yeah, probably. I mean, again, thankfully the UFC doesn't hire judges, because if they did, they would certainly hire judges that, were male and wanted Lipski to move on. But yeah, I would like her. I mean, I would, if the line gets any wider, it might be a good opportunity to jump. I don't think it's going to happen. But look, even if Lipski wins, she's going to win by decision. I don't think she has a really high ceiling on DraftKings. Look, Fight Metric or UFC Metrics can go crazy and give her a lot of, like, if she lands significant strikes. Look at the significant strikes that Carolina got credited for last time, 111. I'm pretty sure she probably didn't actually land that many. But I do see some value here in the dog. I probably won't have a whole lot of shares of Lipsky, but I'll tell you, this is one way, and I'll definitely be tuning into.
But so, if the UFC had their way, in theory, like the way you frame that, I mean, they want Lipsky to win, right? They want her to be successful. Obviously, they can't like make her win. Like, but wouldn't they put her with, like, quote unquote, like a cupcake of some sort?
Yeah, they did that last time, right? Okay. And then based on that win against the short notice replacement who missed weight and was vastly inferior to her, they gave her a 4-fight contract. Yeah. So unless now, again, the way that I understand all UFC contracts to work, they can cut you after 2 consecutive losses, right? So, but they have her for 4 fights, so I don't know that they necessarily have to worry too much. Like, they probably think she's got a shot to win in this fight, but I just don't think it's that sure. And I really do see value at 7.9K. I mean, Lipsky is probably better than Priscilla Kachabeating. But I don't know that she's that much better. And, 7.9K, someone who scored 109 points last time out, if you're looking for value, I think you could do a whole heck of a lot worse.
Is there anybody else from a value perspective that's going to jump for you early?
Okay, so here is, this is a bit of a reach, but, if you follow me here, this is either a fade or dog play. The highest priced fighter on this card is a guy named Joe Duffy, or Irish Joe Duffy.
Yeah.
Irish Joe Duffy's claim to fame is he beat Conor McGregor back in the day. Okay. I think before Conor even had a chest tattoo. He has lately fallen off a cliff. He's fought 3 times since March of 2017. He had kind of an uninspired win against Razor Madadi, where he put up 67 DraftKings points. James Vick, who himself has fallen off a cliff, KO'd him in the second round, and he put 23 points up. Then as a 9.1K favorite, Mark Diakese, who has improved, but who has had holes in his game, won a decision where Joe Duffy only landed 15 significant strikes. So I honestly didn't realize Joe Duffy was still on the roster. I thought he retired. So I'm not sure, I have no faith in him as the most expensive fighter in DK. I'm not saying that his opponent is great. If you look at Alvarez, he had a come-from-behind knockout victory in his last fight, put up 88 points. He has not fought as good competition or, in a top-notch promotion. But I mean, here's a guy, if you look at him up on DraftKings, on Tapology, you'll see that, he is, and again, this is another fight that I don't know why it's on the main card. Actually, maybe it isn't on the main card. It is not on the main card. He's 16-2. Okay. So he's a 16-2 fighter. He's got a height and reach advantage. He's 6'3", 77 inches at 155 pounds. He's got good length. He's got good reach. And again, I don't know what Duffy's MO is. I don't know if Duffy is looking for a paycheck, if he's serious to coming back, but he's had such an uninspired last 3 years. Maybe this is the UFC saying, okay, we'll give you, someone who is maybe not as highly acclaimed, who had a comeback victory in his last fight. We'll give you this guy. If you look good against this guy, you get another fight. He is, again, a favorite in this fight, a pretty significant favorite, which is reflecting in his DraftKings score. But in all honesty, to me, this is, for DraftKings, it's dog or pass. I'll have very few shares of Duffy. I'm obviously intrigued by Alvarez at 6.9K, to put him in some lineups. I mean, you could obviously do a lot when one of your fighters is 6.9K. So I'm definitely going to have more exposure to Alvarez than I have to Duffy, for all of that narrative that I just laid out. I'm not saying it's without risk. And Duffy, maybe Duffy's rejuvenated and he comes out and he sparks this kid, Alvarez, who's, maybe has a slightly padded 16-2 record. But, he is giving up height and reach. He has not looked great over the course of his last 3 fights, 1 win and 2 losses. So, from my perspective, I mean, there's so many more better plays in the upper price points than Duffy, in my opinion. And I think it's worth taking a flyer with Alvarez.
It's interesting. You throw Alvarez and the aforementioned Joe B into the same lineup, and you got 8.9 and change for the rest of your lineup on average, and you can basically do whatever you want. And
exactly.
The other thing I found interesting that I wanted to ask you about, and you talked about it, about Duffy, he's the biggest favorite on this card by a big margin. He's minus 400, Alvarez plus 295. And it's also, but he's not a favorite to knock him out. He's just a favorite to win because it's minus 136 to go the distance. So I love to see the big favorite, with the big number that they're going to, finish it within the distance. But why would I spend that much money on a guy that's probably going to go? I mean, maybe he gets a bunch of significant strikes to hold their conversation. But, we want that first round knockout, preferably late in the first round.
Yeah.
But, so I was looking at Duffy and I was going to ask, he doesn't look like the typical 9.3K guy that just a lock and load.
No, I mean, he's been resting on his IP Conor McGregor laurels for a number of years. I mean, and again, there was also some hardcore contract negotiations with the UFC. And, I think, he was looking for a better deal than they were willing to give him. Again, I just don't, I'm not in love with him as a fighter. I mean, he's got some decent boxing. He's okay on the ground. I just don't, I don't love him in this spot. I don't like guys coming off long layoffs like that. There's just a lot of red flags that I see on this fight. I mean, I would much rather have Grant Dawson at 9.2K. I'd much rather have Montel Jackson at 9.1K. I mean, Dawson is on a roll. He's averaging 106.5 DraftKings points a fight. I mean, I think you'd have to be crazy. He's 15-1 not to pay down $100 and go with Grant Dawson in that fight against Nad Niramani. Give me fade Joe Duffy. Give me Dawson and Jackson.
Yeah, and I was also going to ask about the guy that's 8.9K, and that was where I try to butcher the dude's name. Dolidze?
This is a guy, in all honesty, I don't know a lot about. I mean, he's debuting in the UFC. Let's see, I think he was 6-0. He didn't have really a lot of fights.
What really popped for me is you're looking for that. What really popped for me is the inside the distance number.
Yeah.
Minus 260 to not go the distance, and he's a minus 190 favorite. So just knowing nothing else, those two numbers intrigue me.
Yeah, I think he does hold. And he's 32 years old with only 6 fights, which kind of worries me a little bit. Fights out of Soviet Georgia. 6-0, which again is okay. But you'd expect someone 32 years old to have had more than 6 professional fights.
That seems weird.
Yeah, which kind of worries me. He is the number 2 ranked lightweight in Ukraine, for whatever that's worth, and 28th in Eastern Europe. One thing I will say is he probably comes pretty close for tying as the fighter with the most body hair in the UFC. So I'm sure that after round 1, no one's going to want to wrestle with this guy. So I could certainly, maybe give him a round 2 or 3 finish. And here's the thing too, so you've got a debuting fighter who hasn't fought since 2018. What's
he been doing?
I don't know. And now I'm going to hope that someone has some narrative.
Yeah.
Because I just haven't had a lot of chance to look into him. So there could be a very solid reason why a guy who's 32 years old with 6 professional fights, hasn't fought, in essentially the last 2 years. But there's all types of red flags here. So unless I pick up some significant narrative on this guy, I would be hard pressed to be playing him at 8.9K. I'd rather pay down 100 and play Pantoja, who's definitely put up some points in victories. And this guy, he's fighting Ibragimov. Yeah, he's got 2 losses in the UFC. I get it, but at least he's been more active. You got a Russian fighter against a Ukrainian fighter, or a Russian. Maybe they're both Russian. Has had a pretty decent floor in a grappling heavy type of fight style. 40 points, 52 points is not horrible in a loss. I think if you knew that this guy was going to put up 52 points at 7.3K in a loss, you might sign up for that in cash. So I don't know, man. I got to get some more color on the 6-0, 32-year-old fighter who hasn't fought in the last 2 years.
By the way, the guy that Duffy lost to last time out, Mark Diakis, he's also, I don't know if I pronounced that correctly.
Yeah, Diakese.
Oh, Diakese. Oh, I was way off. Samsonite. Talk to me about Mark.
So Mark the Bone Crusher Diakese. So he came into the UFC with a big splash. This guy was a pure athlete, right? What he lacked in technique, he made up for in athleticism. Like, he was doing body slams and all kinds of stuff. And then, as is typically the case, he went 3-0, and the competition caught up with him, right? So he fights Drakkar Close, he loses by decision. He fights Dan Hooker, he gets subbed. He fights Happarast and gets decisioned. He then takes some time and goes and trains at American Top Team, which has really helped him out a lot recently. He's now on a 2-fight win streak. One of those wins against Duffy, another one against a really game Lando Venata, who he took down 4 times. In his last 2 fights, we've seen 7 takedowns, which is very impressive, and that gives me some hope for a reasonable score here. So, you've got the Bone Crusher, good camp change. Now, Fiserv is no slouch. He's decent. But this is a guy that, and he's coming off a win against Alex White. He's not a great fighter. Only put up 68 points, got 1 takedown. This is the kind of fight that Diakese should win, has to win. 8.5K is not horrible. I'll definitely have some shares of him.
You think he's your favorite guy in the mid-tier as of right now, in the 8 and change, give or take?
Well, let's see. I guess the mid-tier is always defined differently, and I will be completely honest. I do not know a lot as of the moment about Amir Albazi. That's one fight that I kind of have to still do some research on. Spivak is boom or bust, right? So Spivak this is a low-level heavyweight fight. He's fighting a newcomer to the UFC, someone who I, again, don't know a lot about. Heavyweights are always very risky. I certainly like Diakese more than Spivak. I probably like him more against Tuzarkayan. Actually, I don't like him more than Hermanson. I think, again, I'm picking Hermanson to win. So I like Hermanson a bit. And how I feel about Carolina. I think Carolina might be the strongest play. And if you're gonna count mid-range down to 7.9K, I would say that Carolina might be my favorite mid-range play.
I know how you like, you like to make some bets, and you put it out there on Twitter as well. Is Hermanson somebody you're locking in on? He's currently a coin toss for what it's worth. They're both, it's a true coin toss, -112 on both sides.
Yeah, Hermanson I'm going to play. I have not bet him yet, and I'll give you some of the narrative about his opponent, Gastelum. So Gastelum is a fighter who should be fighting at welterweight. If there's anybody in need of a nutritionist, it's him. He missed weight too many times and was told essentially that he had to move up. His last fight, and look, he's been fighting really good competition. I mean, his last fight was against Darren Till, but this was a fight that he was supposed to win. I mean, he was 9.2K on DraftKings. He only landed 40 significant strikes, 1 takedown, and put up 25 DK points. Now, he had a much better fight against Israel Adesanya, who's the middleweight champion. That was a 5-round fight. He landed 91 significant strikes, one takedown, 1 reversal, scored 56 points, which is not a bad floor for 7K because he was a big underdog in that fight. He has some good wins. He KO'd Michael Bisping, Jacare Souza. It's just I see him as a natural 170 fighter. And anytime he runs up against, like some of the bigger middleweights, and I really like Hermanson. They call him the Joker. That's his nickname. He did not have a good luck in his fight against Cannonier, but before that, I mean, he has been DraftKings gold. He put up in a 5-round decision against Jacare Souza, 148 significant strikes, 3 takedowns, 1 advance, scored 122 points at 7.3K. Boys and girls, that's what we call a slate breaker. Prior to that, Branch, he subbed him, put up 100 points. And then against Gerald Mearshart, 41 significant strikes, 1 takedown, and 9 advances, and put up 143 points at 8.8K. So this guy has been really DraftKings gold. Had a bad look against Cannonier, who's really good. The problem with Hermanson is he doesn't have a high floor. At 8K, I'm not super concerned about that because I do like him to win this fight. I do think he's going to be the bigger guy. I like him. I haven't looked at height and reach, but pretty much everybody has a height and reach advantage in middleweight over Gastelum. So I like the Joker here, and I will be making a bet. I mean, if I could get even more value, and I don't necessarily think I will, but I could certainly see him as a standalone or a parlay piece.
Is there any fights as of right now you're looking at as a fade or like a significant underweight to the field, or one that you're going to be significantly overweight to the field?
Yeah. So again, obviously Duffy, I don't like that fight that much. I would lean towards the underdog in that fight. I don't, and just because I don't know a lot about Gordon and Aziz, Ramos and Tazarkian is a pretty interesting fight. Again, these guys, if we look them up real quick on DraftKings, we look up Ramos. He's the dog in this fight. He's averaged 71 significant points. He put up some decent numbers on DraftKings, but against much lower competition. As the competition, and what's interesting is both these guys recently lost to the same fighter, Islam Makhachev, who is part of Khabib Nurmagomedov's camp. I think he's actually the guy that cooks for Khabib during training, and he's a hell of a fighter himself and a real shutdown type of wrestler.
He's really talented.
Yeah, Ramos did nothing against that guy. I think he put up 4 DraftKings points, where Tazarkian had a much better outing. As a matter of fact, afterwards, Islam said how impressed he was with that fight. He was 6.8K. He actually took down Islam, which no one thought would ever happen. Didn't put up a lot of points, but just aesthetically fought a much more impressive fight. And then he went up to Alban Mercier, who is no Islam Makhachev, is not a bad fighter by any means, and won a decision there with 2 takedowns, threw up 47 significant strikes. My issue here is that neither one of these guys lately has been really good scorers on DraftKings. So this is kind of just a grindy fight. Unless one party dominates, I don't necessarily see a really high score coming in this fight. So it may be fadeable for that reason. If you're doing 20 lineups, I could certainly see perhaps leaving this fight out or maybe doing 1 lineup max. Obviously, you want some of this fight if you're doing 150 in the 18. But this is one of those fights that I probably don't want a ton of exposure to, unless it's just pure contrarian. Because I based on past performances, recent records, recency bias, I don't know that these guys are going to put up a lot of points.
Yeah, it's interesting you're talking about not knowing a heck of a lot about a certain fighter. I don't know if DK or FanDuel knows a lot about some fighters either. Because there's 3 fights out there where there's still no number as far as to finish, the odds to finish, and it's the Ramos fight, the Gordon fight, and the Spivak fight. All 3 of them we have odds at least, but as far as to finish, we don't have that just yet. I would imagine we will come Saturday. Of course, we're recording this on Thursday night. What do you have going on later on this week? You doing anything with Brett or?
Yeah, we're gonna maybe Brett and I will do a Creating Alpha. We always get a lot of call for that, but let me tell you, if anybody's going to need oxygen at the end of this week, it's Brett. I mean,
he's got to be exhausted.
Yeah, he put out 15,000 words for the for the Millie Maker card. He had to turn around and get out content for Wednesday slate for it to be useful. So that all went up on Tuesday. And if you want to add insult to injury, this poor guy, he's got a outside of his window in his apartment, someone's air conditioning unit is broke, and it's just making all kinds of noise. The poor guy can't sleep. Someone sent him an Ambien, because he's just so poor guy's not getting any sleep. He's had 3 cards to put out content for, right? All of his obligations with RotoGrinders. We may squeeze in an alpha tomorrow. It really depends on Brett. I mean, my work schedule has been a bear, which I appreciate you guys working with me to do this at 6:30. But yeah, this is going to be an interesting week. I really thought the slate to make money on was last night, because anybody who was prepared, given the quick turn time, should have had a really distinct advantage. Obviously, that was not me, because I thought I was prepared, but I overly relied on McCann, and was much heavier on her than I should have. And it could have worked out a lot differently. So again, and I know I always pitch it and I sound like a broken record. And Dean, you could confirm this. I don't get a dime for anybody who buys premium or Brett Apley's package. So
not to my knowledge, yeah.
I'm very clear about, I am an independent. I don't sell picks. I don't get money for anything that I do, outside of my day job. So when I give advice, it is purely based on the inherent value that I see in it. And I see a lot of value in Brett's, package. He puts a ton. I mean, he agonizes over each and every write-up that he does. So this is a guy, go to RotoGrinders. It's not that expensive. Go to premium, go to core, buy this package. For those of you that had not had as much time to prepare as you would like, this is what you really need. And he's very clear, like, read the write-ups. Don't just read who he's picking. Like, read the write-ups. It's tempting
to scroll down and just look at the names.
It is. It's very well, look, when there's 15,000 words, Dean, I mean, maybe you don't have time to read 15,000 words, but it's really important. And, depending on what you play, like what level, how much you play, it's certainly it's so cost effective. And I know people who are penny wise and pound foolish. I mean, if you're playing $1,000 on a card, you should spend whatever, the $9 or $10 or whatever it is to buy, to buy a write-up. And it's not a tout, it's a review. He tells you who he's playing. He tells you what his exposures are going to be. And let me tell you, Brett is one guy, and I'm not going to mention any names. There are other guys out there that provide content that don't play. Look, they know MMA and they do a good job, but they're simply not players. And to me, I want to roll with guys who have their own money on the line personally, and that's Brett. So that's my big pitch for Brett. Trust me, I'm not getting anything for doing this. I'm just trying to help you guys out. I would never, ever recommend anything that I don't believe in myself. So that is a good way to go. Look, and also if you buy the premium MMA, you get the lineup optimizer and Brett's core plays, cash plays, and GPP. You could actually click on them and actually have that factor into how the lineup optimizer works. So I mean, I don't know about you, Dean, but I can't build 150 lineups by hand. I mean, even for other sports, I'm sure you've used the lineup optimizer or two.
I certainly have, but a lot of times I like to hand build my stuff too, but I'll make it just to sort of see what they look like.
Right.
And it's worth noting, I know we gave away, we're celebrating our 10th year anniversary for RG, and we gave away the optimizer and the lineup HQ for golf. And a couple of days ago, and I believe, I'm fairly certain, you can use it for showdown slates as well too. So I think that's still free. Don't quote me on it, but if you guys are not aware, try it. And yeah, it's a really fun tool, and there's lots in there, like you said. And then the golf, they have 4 or 5 different guys giving their favorite plays from a cash perspective, tournament, yada yada yada. They also have the projections as far as points, and for the lineup builder, you can say, hey, I want 5% of this guy, no more, no less. I want to X this guy out. I want to lock this button, and and a lot of times I'll click, optimize and play it. And you can get you can spin it like a 15% variance, 20% variance, 5% variance. And, it's just all part of the package here at RT. And I hope I'm talking about this. I hope you guys can use this for golf. You guys are playing golf. And of course,
you can definitely use it for MMA. Everything you just said, showdown slates. And look, anybody who runs a lineup optimizer and does not put percentages in, you're doing yourself a disservice. Sure. I mean, you're defeating the whole purpose of using the lineup optimizer, because if you're just running the lineup optimizer as is, think about how many people are going to get those same results. Like what you want to do is, and you could use ownership. You could use Brett Apley's ownership projections. You could use your own ownership projections. And usually I'll start with a set of ownership projections, and then I will tweak them based on what I feel. And then I never get what I want on the first run. It's a lot of trial and error. I mean, I might have to spend a half hour, 45 minutes doing runs until I get to ownership levels that I feel are okay. I mean, I never get exactly what I want. It's just how much am I willing to sacrifice one way or another. I mean, I think maybe one card I actually got exactly what I wanted, using my percentages and running the lineup optimizer. But generally, it's a back and forth, and you got to put the percentages in. You got to use ownership projections. Otherwise, you're going to get the same lineup everybody else gets. And one thing I would do is look at the betting line odds and then lock in the 3 lock in the 3 highest priced fighters and see, based on betting line odds, and see how many lineups you can generate by doing that. So if you did that last night, you would have gotten 7 lineups using the top 3 fighters. That's a little trick that I've learned. Sometimes I'll also look at, there are cases, it's very rare, where you can build an entire DraftKings lineup out of betting line favorites. So you could, it is very rare that happens, but you can do that where every favorite, and that's based on obviously line movement. That is a lineup you should always play. I mean, just from a line value perspective.
Now we're on the conversation. I'm just curious now because how much you can, there's many things you can adjust, obviously. You can adjust how much money you want to leave on the table. And sometimes you can say, I want to leave no more than 500 or 1,000 or 1,500. Or sometimes people will say, I don't want to max. I don't want to, have a perfect. I don't want to get to the exact number. I want to leave at least 100 over, because again, you don't want to duplicate with somebody else. Generally speaking, how much are you willing to leave on the table?
See, what I have a range. Like I'm okay with the $50,000 lineup generally, just because there's typically a number of combinations that could get there. I typically don't want to leave. I'll generally set it at a max on the downside to say 48K, maybe 47.5 if I'm maxing playing 150 lineups, because, the natural, especially the hand builders, the natural inclination is to use as much salary as you possibly can, right? Like that's just human nature in building lineups. You're like, okay, I got these guys that I like, but man, I'm leaving $1,000 on the table. Should I be doing that? And by using the lineup optimizer, it takes that natural inclination away. So I just want to cap it a little bit on the downside. And I want to look at it after I see my run, how many lineups am I putting in? What's the average salary per lineup? And then again, I don't micromanage it, but I do set it on because again, I also don't want 46K lineups.
Yeah.
Either typically, I don't want a lineup that leaves 4,000 on the table and gives me the bottom tier, salary guys. So I want a kind of a mix. I want to go 48 to 50K typically.
Yeah, and it does another, depending on the sport as well too, because the optimal lineup at the end of a baseball slate sometimes could be like 5,000 under the cap.
Right.
The absolute worst player in baseball, can have the best possible fantasy night, better than Mike Trout, better than everybody, and that's just how it goes sometimes.
Well, that's the running joke for me. I mean, I've done horrible in baseball in the past. I don't play a lot, but one thing that I always seem to be able to nail in baseball was that $2,000 catcher who hits a home run or 2 home runs. Like, the 6K guy that I'm putting in the lineup, goes 0 for 5 with 3 strikeouts. But the 2K catcher, because that's all I had left, and the catcher is typically the last guy I look to get in my lineup, the 2K catcher goes off and hits like 2 home runs and puts up 28 points. Yeah, that's what I was known for. Not that it won me any money, but so you're right. I mean, a lot of times you look at the other sports and you do leave money on the table.
That's baseball for you. I'm looking forward to it. I can't wait. I guess it's about a week away or so.
You're a baseball guy, right?
Baseball and basketball are my 2 favorite sports. So yeah, I'm excited. I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful, and I'm excited. That,
there is a chance to win some really nice high-end SAT tickets for baseball and MMA. You should check those out. I mean, there was one I put in because I will play the SATs for the other sports just because I know there's always someone who can help me figure out how to put a lineup together. They had some really good satellites for MLB. Like there was one for one of the $1,500 tickets or something that they had that you could have won for $9 or something crazy like that on MMA. So I will build up tickets to other sports by virtue of MMA.
And opening night we have a couple $1 million tournaments, I believe, opening night, if I'm not mistaken, for baseball. Or there's a 2-game. I think it's a 2-game slate on Thursday.
Wow,
$1 million contest. $10 to jump in there.
Showdown slate.
I don't think it's a showdown. I'm clicking on it right now on the fly, but
oh no, it wouldn't be because there's
I don't believe so. But
2 game. Well, I won some tickets for the Millie Maker in NBA when NBA starts.
Yeah.
So I have some tickets that I won in MMA that I'll probably throw in a few lineups there.
Yankees, Washington, and then San Fran versus the Dodgers. Spoiler alert: San Fran's going to be really low on the 2-game slate. And if you want to embrace some variance, there you go.
What's Adam Judge? Aaron Judge is going to go through the roof.
And the Dodgers are going to crush. All right, That's enough baseball talk. That's all our sport. But yeah, so let's put this on a bow. What should we reiterate? Anything you want to bring home? Anything we didn't talk about as far as the slates, or close it out for us?
Okay, so real quick, we didn't talk about the fight, but I think it's kind of interesting. Montel Jackson is fighting Brett the Pikey Johns, and for those of you that don't know, the Pikey is what they call a gypsy in the UK.
Okay,
so that's slang for gypsy. Pikey. If you've ever seen like Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels, any of those Guy Ritchie movies.
I need the words on the screen to figure out what they're saying.
Yeah, Brad Pitt played the Pikey, the boxer. It was a great role by Brad Pitt. He played the Pikey. Pikeys are gypsies. So Brett, looked really good in his last fight, put up a big number, and now they throw him to Montel Jackson. You got to look at Montel Jackson for the weight class. He is huge. His hand size is the same as like Francis Ngannou's, the heavyweight. So Montel Jackson is an absolutely huge 135er, I believe.
Wow.
I should know this. If you should see how big he is, what his reach is. It's going to be an interesting fight. Brett Johns took some time off, came back really strong, and now he's getting thrown to Montel Jackson, who's just an absolute beast. He's a bantamweight, Montel Jackson. So he weighs 135 pounds. He's 5'10" with a 75.5-inch reach at 135 pounds. and with massive hands. And then, you look at Brett Johns, who, look, he's a good fighter. He's 16-2. He's 5'7", which is not short, but he's at a 5.5-inch reach disadvantage at 135 pounds. So, it's a shame because I really like Brett Johns. Put up a good DraftKings score in his last fight after coming off of 2 losses. Had a big number. He was only a really slight favorite. And now he's unfortunately getting thrown to Montel Jackson, who's kind of a beast. And, he's a big underdog in this fight. So I think that's an interesting fight from a watching perspective. I also like Jackson, for DraftKings. I think the fight will be semi-competitive because Johns is a good fighter. And then the only thing I'll close out with is just from a betting perspective. I definitely like Hermanson here. I think Hermanson is certainly worth a bet at near even. Gastelum is not an easy out, but again, I think he's a natural welterweight. So I would certainly take a look at betting on Hermanson, and I would also take a shot, honestly, with Carolina. As much as I hate the idea of my girl, Ariana Lipski. And by the way, there's a video on Twitter that has this like Women of MMA video, which is kind of cool. You guys should check it out. It's got a really good soundtrack, and Lipski is one of the fighters on that video. But I really think Carolina is live here. And if that line widens at all and Lipski becomes a bigger favorite, I would certainly consider a play on Carolina. And I do think there's some value, although Figueiredo is a beast, at this number, purely a value play on Joe Benavidez.
By the way, if you like Hermanson, minus 112 on DK, just kind of jumping around. He's plus 100 on FanDuel.
Wow.
So there you go.
Yeah, I like that. I like that plus 100. One thing, I am doing a betting pod. I forgot to mention it. I am doing a betting pod tonight. It's really just, it's not a DK pod. It's a betting pod with the guys at Bro Picks. Those guys have been putting out content for a long time. A bunch of young guys. They invited me to come on, so I'm looking forward to that. I like these betting pods because, I'm a DraftKings player first. So I get as much as I give on these pods. So if you guys want to watch a betting pod with a couple guys that, again, put their own money out, I'll be coming on that tonight. I believe it's going to be live, and you can watch it live. Oh, actually, you know what? You're going to have to watch it recorded because this is not going to be released. So
no,
I would say watch the replay of that. It's Bro Picks, BRO Picks pod. I'll be on that pod as a guest.
You were great on the podcast, by the way. You were fantastic. You had amazing picks.
I appreciate that, Dean. I also did the Sub and Club pod. I do that occasionally, which is one of my buddies here in New Jersey. He moderates that. And if anything, we had 6 guys on this pod. We went for 2.5 hours for the Millie Maker. So like every now and then I'll go on that pod when I've got like 2 hours to spare. Those guys do, they're betting pods. They're not DraftKings pods. There's no conflict with what you're hearing here on RotoGrinders, which is predominantly a DraftKings pod, although we do try to give you some bets.
Yeah, I mean, it's good to hear different perspectives and people coming at it from different ways. And I'm sure
Right.
you get something from guys that have gambling perspectives, and they're not even in a world of like, well, how much is somebody's salary in DK? They don't care.
Yeah, and for those of you that might think that that I have a problem, I did bet on Joey Chestnut to go over in the hot dog eating contest, and I got a boost from DK on that, and yes, I cashed on that bet.
You got a well, the thing is, I unfortunately don't live in a state where I can wager on such things, but legally, you got to factor in the weather. I was thinking, even chief meteorologist Kevin Roth was talking about it. Like normally, I mean, I wonder if you've actually been there before, because it's probably not far. Coney Island, right, is where nobody goes down, and it's probably like 9,500 degrees on July 4th. They do it like at 11 or noon, and they were in controlled conditions where it was like 75, 78, whatever it was, 80, and yeah, it was weird. There was no crowd to kind of cheer him on. And I don't know if that's something that actually helps or hurts.
He went over, and I actually just saw Joey Chestnuts eat 32 Big Macs. I mean, I can't even conceive how anyone could do that. Like 32 White Castles would be hard enough. I've seen a guy do 32 White Castles.
Yeah.
But 32 Big Macs, I mean, that's incredible. And he had to eat all the lettuce that like fell out off the burgers afterwards. So that was fun.
You got to eat the grizzle.
Yes, you do.
The old 96er. I may or may not have watched Eric Badlands Booker drink 4 Shamrock Shakes on YouTube like a week or two ago. He had like a brain freeze in the middle of it, like this giant boot. He put the 2 of them in, and he finished it like 4 Shamrock Shakes in like, I don't know, 40 seconds or something ridiculous. And he was terrible at the hot dogs. It's always interesting how they specialize. Like, this guy's great at eating asparagus, but he can't eat hot dogs. I know, right? Why is there certain, the certain skill for certain things?
Or matzah. Like, there are some guys that have an amazing tolerance to heat. Like, so they could eat hot stuff, right? Where others can eat quantity, but they can't eat heat. So it's really interesting, these food challenges. And, look, Joey Chestnut, that's all he does. He is a full-time competitive eater, and that's how he makes his living, is competitive eating. And now he's like, I'm sure he's making money off of YouTube, because you've got 2 million people tune in to watch this guy eat 32 Big Macs.
My absolute favorite thing, we'll go in a second, but this is just on my brain. Yeah. My favorite thing is the hyperbole of the announcers. Like when they start, Joey Chestnut, he's the babe. They start comparing him like all the greatest athletes of all time. Like LeBron only won this many titles, and Babe Ruth only won this, hit this many home runs, and they put it this ridiculous hyperbole. Like, if you didn't know any better, you'd think Joey Chestnut is the greatest athlete of the last century and a half, which maybe he is. I don't know. It's debatable.
Yep. He is. Look, I remember Kobayashi, the 130-pound guy that held the record for a lot of years, and was just a small little guy that could eat like hot dogs like nobody else. And I think he went to Smith and Wolenska the night before the, steakhouse the night before the hot dog eating contest. I don't know how you do that stuff, but anyway, competitive eating. You could bet on anything.
We got to have a podcast July 3rd next year. We'll break down.
That'd be a lot of fun.
Well, it'll take like 3 minutes though. Like, bet Joey Chestnut. Good night, everybody.
I mean, I love the guy. There's a guy, he actually does some work for RotoGrinders, Pat Mayo. And he does stuff like he handicaps The Bachelor. I mean, he does all kinds of weird things, Pat Mayo. And I'm like, like when you're handicapping the TV show The Bachelor, like who's going to get the rose and stuff like that. I mean, it just shows that there's a market for anything. There's this one guy I know who he actually convinced his parents to allow him to quit school to be a full-time gambler. This guy's betting on Russian ping pong. I mean, there's literally like on DraftKings, you could bet on Russian ping pong, Russian table tennis. So like cornhole, which is a name that I wouldn't want to call a game, which, you throw that little bean bag into. I mean, you could bet on that. I mean, it's incredible. It's amazing what you can bet on.
With that, let's see. Your Twitter is it SunTszu Joe?
It's at SunTszu, SUNTSZU. By the way, my hat, this is a tribute to first responders. My police department hat here. Shout out. I know quite a few, and guys, look, we appreciate the heck out of what you guys are doing. The fact that you guys are showing up and working, in these high pandemic areas, like you don't get paid enough for that. So just a big shout out to first responders.
There you go. With that, he was Joe. I was Dean. This was MMA. This was the Morning Grind also. We're out of here.
Yeah. Peace.